Chapter 34, October 19th, 2173, 1435 EST, Hades Gamma Cluster, Anedia System, SSV Hyderabad, Flight Lieutenant 2nd Class Roger O'Brien. Roger could think about a dozen other things he would prefer to fill out a maintenance report, but some things just had to be done, in particular, if one lived on a military ship. Sometimes he wondered if there would come a moment some idiot up the food chain would decide that there had to be reports about the number of toilet papers used. By the number of ridiculous ones that were floating around, it wouldn't be too surprising. His cousin Iris once told him her theory that their goal was to distract the crew members and direct their anger and bottled-up energy at the people demanding those reports to reduce altercations between them. It certainly sounded a lot smarter than anything he could come up with. And Iris studied psychology for half a year before she decided that healing the mind wasn't as interesting or exciting as shooting guns and went to join the Alliance Marine Corps. While most of his extended family had bemoaned her decision, Roger had been happy for her. After all, if she was happy, then what else did count? And she was good at it. She recently wrote him she finished the N2 course and got invited to the N3 course. Furthermore, she didn't elaborate on it. Apparently it was hush-hush, but she got an offer to join some special program if she finished the N4 training with the same marks she finished her previous two. He got never invited to any special program, but he wasn't as good a soldier as her, so it was okay. She was her, and he was him. Every person is different. It helped to know that she would never be as good as him when it came to piloting or driving. When they were young, Roger trounced her in every simulation, and that stayed the same until now. Furthermore, it wouldn't take long until he could apply to the next round of assessments at Arcturus Station. Only this last escort mission, and if he finished the test with a good grade, it would show up in his file, and his chances for a promotion would shoot up. "Still writing that report?" asked a voice behind him. Roger turned his head to look over his shoulder and saw his wingman, Tobias Brenston, coming towards him. "You know how many things go into them. It doesn't help that it's a dull affair too," responded Roger with a shrug. "Don't I know it," agreed Tobias. "I finished mine not too long ago, handed it in, and got me something to eat." "Lucky you," grumbled Roger. "I've been at it for an hour or two, and it still needs some time. Everything's in order, but I'm double-checking to be on the safe side." "Always a good idea. It would be embarrassing if your fighter didn't even get into the air because of a part you thought was working, but actually wasn't." "Like Jeremy?" asked Roger with a shit-eating grin on his face. "Like Jeremy," agreed Tobias laughingly. "I can't believe he forgot to reconnect the generator with the rest of the fighter after he finished his maintenance. And right before a drill, too. I'm still sure that the commander only screamed at him so much that he didn't start laughing at Jeremy's stupidity. I saw the corners of his mouth twitching upwards ever so often during his rant." "And I still say that you were hallucinating," countered Roger. "The commander and laughing don't belong in the same sentence?" Tobias snorted. "Yeah, you're right, but we should stop talking about him, or he will appear behind us and start another of his rants." He looked over Roger's fighter and asked, "Do you want some help? I have some free time, and if two are working on it, it should be over faster." "That would be great," Roger agreed thankfully, and handed him the tablet with the report open on the front. "Here, take this. My hands are dirty anyway, so it's better if I check the parts. Besides, I know what I already checked." "Good thinking. Double-checking is all right, but triple-checking is overkill." Roger went to the open maintenance hatch of his fighter and started to go through the list of parts he still had to check to make sure they were working properly. They were working in silence for a few minutes, only interrupted whenever Roger called out the parts he finished checking so that Tobias could mark them on the report. That went on until his hand touched one of the screws keeping an important part secured. "Hey, can you give me the screwdriver? One of the screws securing the primary turbo supercharger is a bit loose." "Sure. Wouldn't want that part going its own way during a high-speed fight," answered Tobias and went to the toolbox that was standing at the side. "Still got the standard screws? Why shouldn't I?" Heard from Daphne that she was exchanging the standard screws for a 23 screws. Apparently the bigger diameter helps secure the turbo better. At least she didn't have any problems with it getting even slightly loose. "And how did she get that through the commander? Those screws are definitely not regulation, and that man would get on our cases if we even put a sticker on the insides of the cockpit. She filled out a request to use the A-23 screws as an official experiment to improve the efficiency of our fighters. As long as you make it official, and it could really improve their performance, the commander is okay with it. Nice to know, grumbled Roger. I'll fill one out the next time, to have more objects to compare or so. Me too, agreed Tobias with a nod and handed Roger the needed screwdriver. But let us finish this one first before we even think about more paperwork. Yeah, you're right. Besides, continued Tobias, it could be that we'll be getting new fighters in the future. Do you know something that I don't? Asked Tobias while making sure the screw couldn't move one bit after retightening it. Heard a rumor from my friend on the Citadel. You have friends everywhere, don't you? Hey, what can I say? Answered Tobias with a shrug. I'm a popular guy. You were just lucky enough to be born with a slightly handsome look, you ass, countered Roger. And it was true. While Roger could be called rugged with his bigger-than-average nose and eternally disheveled red hair, Tobias could charm anyone he met. Brown curly hair, dark blue eyes, and pearly white teeth. Add those features to his open and charismatic personality, and people flocked to him whenever they went out when they had shore leave. Yet for some reason, Tobias couldn't hold a relationship for longer than a month. In his words, that was because he didn't want to bind himself so early in his life. But Roger knew it was because Tobias was an ass and an idiot deep down. A lovable idiot and a good friend, but an idiot nonetheless. And I thank my mother for it every day, Tobias responded with a grin. Yeah, instead of continuing to sing hymns in your mother's honor, could you please give me the ammeter? I want to check if the current flow is all right. Sure thing. Oh, and by the way, is your mother still on your case? Last I heard, she wants some grandbabies, teased Roger. Since he had heard Tobias coming closer to him after finding the ammeter, he held his arm back, expecting Tobias to put it in his hand. Yet after waiting a few seconds, he still couldn't feel anything, so he turned his head back, only to see his friend frozen with a deep red face. Hey, Tobias, are you okay? He asked, concerned at seeing his friend so. How do you know that? Whispered Tobias, and Roger could hear the shock and horror in his voice. Oh, that's why. You forgot to turn off the loudspeaker the last time you spoke with her, Roger answered with a grin. But there wasn't anyone in the room. Melanie stood before it, and it was loud enough to echo through the door. So it isn't just you, but her who knows too? Tobias asked, horrified. Not just us, chuckled Roger, and could barely hold back laughing out loud at the sight of his friend's facial expression. She told the story in the mess hall. That's how I know. So I would say the whole ship knows by now. You forgot how much of a gossip she is. Fuck, Tobias cursed out loudly. Doesn't she know that some things should stay private? Didn't you tell her something 2 weeks ago, expecting the same to happen? That's not the same. Tobias dismissed the accusation, fleeing towards the arms of an age-old friend. Hypocrisy. Sure it isn't, said Roger with an eye roll. Anyway, now that you're out of your state of shock, can you finally give me the ammeter? My arm's getting numb. Here, grumbled Tobias and gave him the ammeter before continuing to curse under his breath. So what were you going to tell me? Something about a rumor you got from a friend on the Citadel? Asked Roger, giving Tobias the opportunity to change the topic. Right, exclaimed Tobias, glad for the chance to shove the topic of everybody knowing about his talk with his mother to the back of his thoughts. So as I said, I got a friend that works as a security guard at the embassy. She sees and checks everybody that comes and goes. And do you know who came by a few months ago? No, but you're going to tell me anyway, responded Roger while connecting the ammeter to a different cable. Oscar Denebrin. The Oscar Denebrin? Asked Roger, turning his head away from the inside of his fighter to look at Tobias. After seeing the grin on Tobias's face, Roger knew that he was telling the truth. Yup, the Oscar Denebrin, the man who probably funded and developed more than half of our equipment. Our fighters came out of his factory, so who knows what else. Yeah, we all know what he's done for the Alliance. But I want to know about the rumor you're talking about, urged Roger. Whenever Oscar Denebrin was involved, things got interesting. Dozens of rumors were floating around about the man, and if one started to believe everything said about him, Then Oscar was a half-god sent by the heavens to lead humanity into a golden age that would last 1,001 years. Complete bullshit, but Roger could understand why some people believe that. Yet, like his grandpa said, a man is a man, no matter what he does. Oscar Denebrin may appear as all those things people said about him, but in the end, he was still a normal human. Still, even if he was just a man, it didn't diminish anything he created and achieved. Oscar Denebrin wasn't slowly becoming a living legend for nothing. "I'm getting to it," replied Tobias with a hand gesture that said, "Patience." So he meets with our ambassador, which isn't really surprising. After all, who else is he going to visit there, right? Major Alec Ryder, the military attaché, is called to the ambassador a few hours later, and he leaves shortly after their talk. 2 days later, he comes back to the embassy and resigns his post. "Just the one at the embassy?" asked Roger. "Nope," answered Tobias. "Apparently, he resigned from the Alliance too. As far as my friend knows, he got a job offer from Denebrin and took it. It's what I would do. Ad Astra is probably paying a lot better than the Alliance. Thinking about leaving the Alliance and taking a job there? Wish I could," sighed Tobias. "I still have a few years of service ahead of me before I can even think about resigning. But after that, who knows? If they offered me a job, I wouldn't say no. Don't think anyone would say no. So I'll still have you as my wingman for a little longer?" "You're not getting rid of me that easily," joked Tobias. "One can dream," sighed Roger jokingly. "Yet you still haven't told me why you think that we're getting new fighters? Does Major Ryder specialize in engineering? Is he the one creating a new model?" "Don't think so. I heard that Ryder specializes in programming and computer sciences. But there was some buzz in the Citadel HQ of Ad Astra around the time Ryder resigned. Even my friend didn't know much, but she learned that there was a major shift in the priorities of the Research and Development Division." "A major shift? What does that mean?" asked Roger. "And if there was a shift, what did they prioritize before?" "I don't know any details, but they shifted their focus away from developing the new generation of dreadnoughts to other ship types." "Away from dreadnoughts?" repeated Tobias quietly to himself, as he let his eyes wander over the different parts of his fighter engine to check if he forgot anything. "Sounds good to me," he said as he closed the maintenance hatch. "And what do you mean by that?" asked Tobias while going over the points of the report to double-check if they forgot anything. "With the Treaty of Frixen still in play, the Alliance can't field many dreadnoughts. There's no reason, in my opinion, why we should concentrate on them if we could improve every other ship. If a frigate, for example, could hit half or even just a third as hard as a dreadnought. And since they aren't restricted by any treaty, we could build as many as we wanted," continued Tobias. "Exactly," agreed Roger with a nod. "The overall firepower of the Alliance Navy would shoot up. And of course, there are other ship types too. Cruisers, destroyers, carriers, and fighters. If they all got an upgrade, a limited number of dreadnoughts wouldn't matter so much to us." Tobias scratched his chin with his thumb and looked thoughtful. "It would give us room to use different tactics and strategies. After all, the standard tactic in space battles is to form 2 lines and shoot each other, and the one with the bigger or more guns is usually the winner. It's the same tactic we used when we first invented guns." "Any idea why that's still the usual tactic?" Roger asked while cleaning his hands from the oil that got on them during the maintenance. "Well, I think that's because..." But before Tobias could voice his thoughts, a siren echoed through the hangar bay, and a voice called out over the intercom, "Attention to all personnel. 2 frigates, Turian model, appeared on our scanners. Allegiance currently unknown. Alarm code yellow." Roger and Tobias looked at each other meaningfully and walked toward the lockers that stood next to the entrance to the hangar bay. "Well, it's good that we're already here, so we can get our gear on quick," said Tobias while tipping in the code to open his locker. Its door opened with a quiet hiss. Roger did the same and took out his flight suit. "I'm happier that I finished the maintenance on my fighter before the alarm sounded. I would hate to be grounded if we had to get out there," he responded with a smile. "Always looking for action, huh?" "Don't say it like that. Aren't you the same?" "Guilty as charged," confirmed Tobias with a chuckle. Without further conversation, they put on all their gear except their helmets with the speed and grace of those who trained, until they could do it without thinking about it even for 1 second. Shortly before they finished, the door to the hangar opened, and two of their fellow fighter pilots, Anya and Konstantin, entered. They greeted each other with short nods but kept silent otherwise. The situation wasn't too tense right now, but it could turn so in a heartbeat. So they let each other have those remaining calm moments before they potentially entered into battle. Tobias and Roger moved away from the lockers and busied themselves with putting away the tools Roger used for the maintenance of his fighter, instead of just standing around and waiting for further orders. If Roger had to start his fighter, all those tools lying behind it, they would be thrown around the hangar bay by the propulsion of the jet engine. They put their helmets on the ground and started to clean up. The door opened twice again as they worked and admitted 5 more two-man teams into the hangar, who put on their flight suits just as fast as Tobias and Roger. Anya and Konstantin walked over to help them after they finished gearing up, and together they put all tools away before the last fighter pilot got their suit on. With nothing more to do, all pilots went to their respective fighters and entered the cockpit and started with the pre-flight checkups. The order to fly out didn't come yet, but it didn't hurt to prepare. Roger was halfway done with his checkup when the intercom howled with a short but sharp alarm. "Attention! Frigates identified. Pirate attack imminent. All combat personnel to their post. Fighters in the air. Alarm code red." A cold shudder went down Roger's back. If it was because of the suddenly tense atmosphere or anything else, he didn't know. But what he did know was that it came at the right moment to wake his mind fully up, and he would need all his mental faculties for what was to come. Anything else could mean his death. One moment of inattentiveness and it would be over. There was no coming back from death, and death was something Roger only wanted to experience when he was gray and old. He finished his checkups as fast as he could and put his helmet on. With expert movements, Roger connected it to the rest of the suit, and a flick of the wrist was all he needed to activate the connection. The slight looseness of his flight suit disappeared, and it nestled itself onto his body. It took just a moment longer, and the restricted field of vision of his visor expanded. The inner side of his helmet synchronized with the small cameras on the outside, and Roger could see as if he weren't wearing a helmet at all. A click sounded through his helmet, and the voice of the flight commander sounded, "Comms check. All units respond." One after another, the fighter pilots gave their all clear, and when it came to Roger's turn, he said, "Delta 2 here. All systems green." After everyone replied, and thankfully nobody had any problems with their fighters, the commander spoke again. 2 pirate frigates were identified not 10 minutes ago. They need another 10 minutes to be in firing range. Their expected target is the freighter we escort. The enemy sent out 6 fighters. Your task is to engage them and keep them away from our ships. When your task is completed, get close to one of the frigates, which exactly is to be determined. Keep the frigate occupied. Get into the air in 30 seconds intervals. Team Alpha starts in 60 seconds. From now on, 150 seconds until it was Tobias and Roger's turn to fly out. It would take 45 seconds until the jet engines had enough power to propel the fighter out of the hangar at the optimal speed to enter combat immediately, if necessary. The minimum time needed to get enough energy into the engine was 15 seconds, and only to be done if the situation required it. Yet an expert pilot could reduce the time to 10 seconds if he knew how to reroute the energy, and how much of it from non-critical systems to the propulsion. The number of pilots who could pull it off was infinitesimal low, at least without ending in a fireball shortly after. The pilot had to assess the situation perfectly so they wouldn't end up as an easy target for the enemy. In the end, most pilots who could do it didn't do it because the situations where a fast start like this was necessary weren't the kind one could go in half prepared. In the blink of an eye, 100 seconds passed, and Roger activated the start sequence. "Are you ready?" asked Tobias over comm. "Yes," answered Roger shortly without his hands stopping for a moment. His eyes went over every screen, taking in every piece of data they displayed. "What about you? Is everything all right?" "Of course," Tobias replied. "A slight energy spike in the weapon systems, but nothing too concerning. It's probably because of the new cables I installed. They always work better in the first 3 flights." "If you say so, I hope you know what you're talking about. If I have to pull your ass out of the fire because your systems fail, you're going to pay the next 3 bar nights during our shore leave." "Same to you. And make it 5. A small smile played over Roger's lips. The pre-combat banter between him and Tobias always helped him to release some of the tension that built up every time before a battle. Somehow he knew that Tobias was the same. He was the one that started this tradition, and at the beginning, he was the one that sounded like the one who needed it the most. Over time, the hidden nervousness in his voice disappeared, but he never failed to make a few comments before any battle. It became something like a good luck charm for them. 10 seconds, said Roger, and made sure that the most important notifications about his fighter systems would appear on his HUD. Then let's go flying, responded Tobias. Roger counted the last 5 seconds down in his head. 4, 3, 2. When his countdown hit 0, Roger hit the release button for the brakes, and his fighter shot forward out of the hangar. He flew in a straight line before swerving right toward the enemy. From the corner of his eyes, he could see Tobias' fighter. He was to Roger's right and a little forward. Good start. Now let's get closer, slow and steady, said Tobias. Alpha 1 has the lead during the approach. When we're close enough, she's going to assign targets so that we're not all going after the same one. All right, confirmed Roger. We're going to proceed as usual. Of course, the others will do the same. There was an understanding between all fighter pilots of the Hyderabad. You eliminated your assigned targets as fast as possible and moved on to help the others. Safety in numbers and all that. Do you know if reinforcements are on the way? Roger asked. While there was no doubt that the Hyderabad could deal with the 2 pirate frigates, it wouldn't hurt to have reinforcements. How should I know, replied Tobias. I was the whole time with you. And if you don't know, I don't know. It's regulation to send a message over the Alliance comm channels, but we're quite far out. So I don't know if anyone is close enough to support us. I'm sure the freighter did the same. Perhaps we're in luck, and there is someone close to us, mused Roger. Enemies in range in 2 minutes, came another voice, the voice of Alpha 1, over the comm channels. Cease private chatter and keep the channels clear for battle information. Our scanners are picking up exact data about their fighters. Your computers should receive your designated targets now. A quick look confirmed her words. His computers got the information, and Roger highlighted them on his HUD so that he could find them easily in the chaos of combat. He rolled his fighter a bit to the right before he got back into position and saw that Tobias was doing the same. It was another of their signs that everything was all right, and it was also a way to say good luck. Roger pushed all unnecessary thoughts from his mind and concentrated on what lay before him. The only thought left was that at the end of the day, he would lie in his bed and pat himself on the shoulder for a job well done. Chapter 35, October 19, 2173, 1553 EST, Hades Gamma Cluster, Anadia System, SSV Hyderabad, Flight Lieutenant of 2nd Class Roger O'Brien. Following the command of Alpha 1 to keep the comm channels clear of chatter, Tobias and Roger stayed silent for the next minute. And it wasn't just them that stayed silent. It was like reality decided that most sounds were unnecessary at that moment. The quiet but steady humming of the engines? Gone. The occasional notifications of the systems? Muted. The echo of his breathing was the only thing Roger could still hear. He could feel his heart beating in his chest with unprecedented clarity. It was like the world was taking a deep breath before all hell cut loose. Yet that moment came to an end when the voice of Alpha 1 calmly ordered, "Enemies in range, lock onto your targets, fire your missiles at my command, and accelerate to combat speed." Nobody vocally acknowledged her command, but it wasn't necessary anyway. It was the standard opening move of the Alliance in a battle between fighters and had become ingrained in their flesh and blood since they left the Academy. A command to fire would have been enough, but just as the preparation for the move had become routine, so too had the call to prepare for it. Roger's targeting computer signaled that it had a firing solution for one of the pirate fighters, and not even 3 seconds later came the words, "Fire," through the comms in the calm and detached tone of a person used to ordering the deaths of other living beings. 2 missiles detached from Roger's fighter, one from each side, and accelerated toward the enemy fighter his computer selected. He watched how they got ever closer and how his opponent tried to change his flight path to dodge certain death. But in the end, it would be of no use. The missiles followed the change course, their inbuilt targeting matrices ensuring they could keep up with him. A skilled pilot could evade them with enough space between their fighter and the missiles. But that wasn't in the cards for the pirate. If it was because of a lack of space or skill, Roger didn't know. But in the end, it didn't take long before the missiles made contact with the pirate fighter, and it exploded in a fiery ball of destruction. And his target wasn't the only one hit. Half a dozen fireballs bloomed in front of the Alliance fighters, yet everything was still silent. One would expect explosions like this to be loud, and they would be correct as long as they didn't happen in space. In that case, they would be utterly silent. Sound didn't carry without a medium, and it could be irritating at first until one got used to it. The disunion between expectation and reality could frustrate and distract an inexperienced pilot heavily. Seeing an explosion and expecting a loud boom, but getting nothing was somewhat surreal. It was nothing like the videos of space battles one could find on the extranet. There were some programs that generated the expected sounds for the pilot, but Roger didn't use any of them. He got used to the quiet and didn't want to be distracted by the explosions happening around him at the wrong moment. Furthermore, they took up valuable data space that one could better use for other, more useful programs that helped operate the fighter. The pirates, those lucky enough not to have been targeted by the missiles, returned to their previous course of coming directly at Roger and his fellow Alliance pilots. Without waiting for any more orders from Alpha 1-1, Roger and Tobias broke from the group to the right in order to get a good line of fire on their next target. T7 is the next closest of our targets, said Tobias, and Roger deaccelerated his fighter for a moment to fly slightly behind him to create a staggered line. All right, he responded, then let's get him. It didn't take long until the mentioned target was in range, and with a press of a button on the top of his controls, Roger sent a burst of mass-accelerated bullets at him. The short flashes in the corner of his eye told him that Tobias was doing the same, adding his own bullets to the attack. This time, his target was flying a bit better, and without the targeting systems, it took 2 more short bursts before the pirate fighter got hit often enough that his shields collapsed. Another burst from Tobias ended his flight forever. Yet before they could coordinate which target would be next, Roger had to bank hard to the left, evading a missile that came from above narrowly. Too narrowly, he thought, cursing himself for focusing too much on the target before him and ignoring his surroundings. A pirate fighter followed the flight path of the missile, and shortly after, an Alliance fighter was hot on his trail. Target 9 is next, called Roger, eager to get the shock out of his system and get back into the fight. Understood, responded Tobias, a sliver of relief in his voice. Nearly losing his wingman had shaken him, as it would Roger if he lost Tobias, but the two of them were professional enough to leave those emotions behind for the moment. In the middle of battle, there was no place for such feelings. Afterward, you could cry, rage, and scream as much as you wanted, but not before, or else you would be joining your wingman sooner than you wanted. It sucked, but that was life for you, and in return, you held every happy coincidence and moment close to your heart. The battle around was growing more chaotic as the pirates started to get used to the Alliance fighters and coordinated better among themselves. It got even more so when one of the 2 pirate frigates finally got close enough to add its point defense guns to the fray, and Roger had to look out for their lines of fire too. Suddenly he noticed something, and a quick and simple plan formed in his mind. Tobias, he called over the comms, there's a pirate fighter coming up behind you. He seems to have you in his sights. Turn slightly right and shift more power to your rear shields. I'm going to take care of him. So I'm the bait? Responded Tobias. All right, but don't take too long. A few lucky shots, too many, and the energy of my shields needs longer than necessary to replenish. They immediately started their plan. Tobias directed his fighter to the right in a slight curve while Roger deaccelerated and shifted his own to the left to make it look like they were splitting up their team, or that way it would make going after Tobias more tempting. Any second, Tobias would call over the comms that the pirate was on his tail, and Roger would change course to come up behind him. Yet, that plan went up in flames when his system started to warn him that something was coming up behind him. His eyes widened, and he wrenched the controls around to perform a barrel roll to the right to evade the burst of gunfire that flew through the position he previously occupied. "Fuck," he cursed. And over the open comm channel, Tobias asked worriedly, "What's wrong?" "He didn't go after you. He went after me. He's sticking to me like a fly," Roger answered, while trying to lose his tail with erratic movements. But no matter what he did, the pirate kept following him, and Roger was too preoccupied with evading the pirate's gunfire to even think about how he could turn the situation around. "Stay alive! I'm coming!" said Tobias, and Roger tried to do just that. He swerved right and left and tried to roll to get behind the pirate, but none of his tricks to lose him worked. But that didn't mean that his maneuvers were without any use. They certainly helped to keep the damage to his shields low, but if it continued for a bit longer, then his shields were guaranteed to collapse at one point. Still, even that became a minor problem when his computer informed him that he was being targeted by the automated targeting systems of the pirate in preparation to send missiles after Roger. While he had multiple ways to counter missiles, from flying erratically to flares to confuse them, it wasn't a good situation nonetheless. "Where are you?" he called through in the comms, hoping for a good answer. "Just where I need to be," came the calm response from Tobias, and the pirate that stuck to Roger's tail suddenly disappeared in a ball of flames. Roger dared to turn his head to see what was going on, and could see how Tobias's fighter appeared out of nothing and settled to his right. "That took a bit too long for my taste," chided Roger, but was relieved nonetheless that his friend got him out of the situation. Sorry, apologized Tobias. "I had to make sure that he didn't see me coming. There's not much cover around us to hide one's approach. The only thing that we could use is that asteroid field over there." Roger looked toward the field Tobias mentioned. It hung around the moon of one of the two gas giants that inhabited the Anatia system, and from the looks of it, it would provide enough cover to confuse the detection systems of any fighter-grade ship. Depending on the composition of the minerals in the asteroids, it could even fool and confuse the scanning abilities of the high-grade equipment installed on cruisers. "Too far away," dismissed Roger, still looking at the field. Something had caught his attention, but he couldn't put into words what it was. "He would have whittled my shields down to nothing if I had flown that way." "If you say so," said Tobias, and accelerated his fighter so that he flew in front of Roger. "We've drifted a bit off from the main battle area. We should get back to it. It doesn't look like they need our help with the remaining fighters, but the Hyderabad looks like it." Now that Tobias mentioned it, Roger could see it too. The Hyderabad was fighting admirably against two pirate frigates at the same time. The Hyderabad was more modern and better maintained by Alliance than the two pirate frigates and dished out a large amount of damage to both. But it was still in a fight of 2 versus 1. It would win the fight, Roger didn't doubt it for 1 second, but no matter how much more advanced it was, if it had to do it without additional help, the Hyderabad would limp out of the fight with some serious damage. "I understand, then let's get on with it," responded Roger. But before he followed Tobias, who was already directing his fighter toward one of the pirate frigates, he threw one last look at the asteroid field. For a second, he thought he saw something in it, but when Roger looked again, he didn't notice anything that could have caught his attention. He lightly shook his head, banishing any excess thoughts to concentrate on the battle. Yet there was still a feeling that didn't let go, and that was that inside the field was something dangerous. "I will try to get as close as I can to the frigate," stated Tobias. "When I'm close enough, I'll send out my flares. Hopefully, it will overload their sensor enough to give you an opening to get your missiles through." "Perhaps it would be better if I do that. Don't you have more missiles than I do?" Roger offered, aware that he already fired a third of his missiles. "We should have the same amount. I also fired some in the opening move but missed my target, so that shouldn't matter that much. On the other hand, your shields are still recharging." "They're back at maximum strength," countered Roger. "You know that that's not what I'm meaning," sighed Tobias. "You know as well as I do that the redundancy needs some more time to recover after the shields were depleted under a certain power level. Don't worry so much. I'm going to be okay." A grimace formed on Roger's face. In all their missions, Tobias had a tendency to propose plans that put him in danger. To be fair, he always came out of these situations without any excessive damages to his ship or person, but it would only take one lucky shot, and Tobias's name would join the long list of those fallen in battle. "All right," agreed Roger reluctantly. While he would have preferred to do it himself, after all, he was the better flyer of them in his opinion, he knew that arguing with Tobias could take a while, and they definitely didn't have the time for that at the moment. The closer they got to one of the frigates, the denser the defensive fire got. The shields of Roger's fighter dropped some percentages every few seconds due to glancing blows hitting them, but thankfully they never dropped to a level where a direct hit could take them out in one shot. Furthermore, the recharge time was still short enough that those lost percentages recovered before another glancing blow hit him. But it was just a matter of time until the redundancy systems that were responsible for the fast charge-up time overheated, and Roger lost that advantage. The same was true for Tobias too, and perhaps more important to his situation. After all, he was the one flying in front of their formation, and thus the one that counterfire from the frigate concentrated from. "Shields at 63% and dropping fast," said Tobias, and confirmed Roger's thoughts, that the fire from the frigates got too dense for them to advance any closer. "Shooting flares in 5. Get ready." At Tobias's command, Roger's hands flew over the controls, getting every remaining missile ready to fire. He didn't bother with engaging the targeting systems of the missiles. The computed flight vector would be enough to ensure they hit the frigate, since it wasn't fast enough to change its position so that they would miss, unlike a fighter. Besides, the cyber warfare programs that were responsible to get an accurate lock on the frigate had to compete with their programs to deny such a thing, and the time needed to come out on top, if they even managed that, would take longer than their window of opportunity. Furthermore, most programs shared their data with other systems, and it could lead to their point defense systems targeting the missiles with priority. "Flares away," called out Tobias, and a group of shining red balls shot out from his fighter. Roger waited another second before he hit the button to release his missiles, which disconnected from his fighter and flew in a straight line into the massive flares. They blended in with the lights, and since they were on a directed path, the signal interference from the flares didn't affect their flight. Most of the defense fire was concentrated on the flares so the missiles could fly unhindered for a time before they got too close, and some of the fire shifted in their direction. One of the 4 missiles was hit almost immediately, and a second one was hit shortly after. Thankfully, it was already close enough that the shockwave from the explosion hit the frigate. It didn't do much, but everything helped. The 2 remaining missiles hit the frigate unhindered, and the shielding at that portion of the ship started to waver. The shield didn't collapse, but its wavering was enough for the Hyderabad to capitalize on it. The powerful cannons of the Alliance cruiser concentrated their fire on that portion of the pirate frigate and brought the shields down. After the shields collapsed, the fire didn't stop and hammered into the hull of the frigate, punching through it in the process and dealing immense damage to it. In a fortunate turn of events, it seemed like the Hyderabad hit something critical as explosions started to appear all over the frigate. Taking no chances, the cruiser continued to fire on the same spot until the pirate frigate couldn't hold itself together anymore and broke in 2 at the point where it was continuously hit. Roger and Tobias watched this happen from a somewhat safe distance, having changed their course after Roger fired his missiles. Tobias's shield went down to just over 40% during the end of their attack, and if one direct hit at a place where the shield was weak, then it would have meant the end for him. Fortunately, this never happened, and now that they were out of the immediate battle zone and the frigate destroyed, Tobias's and Roger's shields had the chance to regenerate and the redundancy to cool down. "Seems like our plan worked," commented Tobias happily. "A completely harebrained and insanely dangerous plan, but you're right, it worked," agreed Roger. "But we can't do a repeat performance, even with the rest of our fighter force." He looked towards the remaining pirate frigate, which had changed course, and put everything it had into its thrusters. "The frigate is flying hard toward the asteroid field, and it won't take long until the main guns of the Hyderabad will get out of range. If the pirates are smart, they'll reroute the energy from their main weapons to their shields, and even a barrage of missiles will be hard-pressed to get through." "I see what you mean," replied Tobias, and was about to comment further when the voice of Alpha 1 appeared over a comm. "Good work, Delta," praised Alpha 1, but didn't comment further on their maneuver. It wasn't her style to heap praise on somebody, and neither Tobias nor Roger needed it. They knew what they had done and were proud of their achievement. "New orders. Rally around the Hyderabad. We're going to chase the pirates for a bit to make sure they're not coming back." "What about the freighter?" asked Roger, wondering why they were leaving it without protection. It continued toward the jump point to the next system while we distracted the pirates. We got confirmation that a group of Ad Astra ships is in the next system. They will be taking over our escort duties and make sure the freighter arrives at the mass relay safely. Understood, replied Roger, feeling a bit better after knowing that their efforts wouldn't be wasted if more pirates were in hiding to ambush the freighter. Without any more questions, Tobias and Roger directed their fighters to the Hyderabad. The rest of the fighters also flew to it, and as Roger looked around, he noticed that some of their comrades were missing. "Do you see Epsilon somewhere?" he asked Tobias. "No, I don't," Tobias answered after a minute. He opened the channel to the rest of their fellow pilots and asked the same question. "Hey, does anyone know what happened to Epsilon?" "Bad luck," came the deep voice of Beta 2. Epsilon 2 got hit by a pirate, and while trying to avenge him, another pirate who lost control of his fighter rammed right into Epsilon 1's ship. "I think she didn't even realize what happened before it was over." "Fuck," cursed Tobias, and Roger thought that this word summed up the situation perfectly. Everybody went into battle with the knowledge that they could lose their life or their comrades, but it would always be a shock to hear or see it happen nonetheless. The thought that he wouldn't see Epsilon 1 and Epsilon 2, Daisy and Mark, the next time he went to the cantina or worked beside them in the hangar on their fighters, was one of sadness. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the happy memories they shared flash before him before he shoved the thoughts to the back of his mind. Roger would deal with them later when he had the time to grieve for them. For now, he let thoughts of them strengthen his determination to see these pirates pay for what they had done. For the next few minutes, nothing extraordinary happened. They kept close to the Hyderabad and flew beside her, watching how the pirate frigate got farther away and closer to the asteroid field than them. Yet it seemed like the frigate was slowly losing power since its speed dropped, and the Hyderabad had a chance to catch up. But something didn't feel right to Roger. There was this feeling of dreadful anticipation that just kept getting stronger inside him, and he could tell that there was something wrong with this situation. The pirate frigate hadn't looked like it was damaged enough to lose energy so fast that its speed would drop to this extent. Normally, it would have enough power to get to the edge of the solar system and initiate an FTL jump to the next one. Of course, exterior damage didn't equal internal damage, and the latter could be higher despite minimal signs on the outside if the Hyderabad hit something critical. But as far as Roger knew, the shields of the frigate hadn't failed for a single moment during the whole time of their battle. The Hyderabad slowly got into attack range, but did so with less speed than before. Apparently, someone on the cruiser had the same feeling as Roger and counseled them to approach cautiously. It was this cautious approach that probably saved the Hyderabad from being destroyed by the surprise attack that came out of the middle of the asteroid field. Roger only saw how a few asteroids suddenly exploded before something hit the left side of the bow of the Hyderabad, and its shields flared up in a striking blue color. His eyes widened in shock. For a moment, he could only watch uncomprehendingly how the wavering of the shields settled down and the blue color disappeared. From the silence of the comms, it wasn't hard to guess that the others were dealing with the same issue he was. It wasn't anything special that kicked him out of his almost trance-like condition. He just blinked, and suddenly it was like the world came back into focus. Adrenaline shot through his body, sharpening his senses and reflexes. His eyes followed the trail of destruction inside the asteroid field, intent to figure out where the attack came from. "There's another ship inside the asteroid field," he called out, activating his comms beforehand. "Where exactly?" asked a voice he couldn't pin down. But it was one full of authority and command that Roger couldn't help but answer as precisely and fast as he could. "Vector 34-21-67. He dutifully answered after checking his onboard computers. "Understood," said the same voice from before, and only then did Roger notice that in his haste to inform the others, he hadn't just opened the comm channel to the rest of the fighter pilots, but to the Hyderabad too. A quick burst of shame ran through him, and he could feel his cheeks heating up at his mistake. But he squashed the feeling as fast as it came up. This wasn't the time to feel something like that. Besides, it seemed like his mistake helped identify the position of their new enemy for everyone. With this information, the Hyderabad would be able to counter the attacks of this new pirate ship. "Attention to all units," the voice which had talked to Roger spoke. We identified the newly appeared vessel. It's a Batarian cruiser of the Deschutes class. Be advised, it carries a fighter contingent, which could already be hiding inside the asteroid field. Fighters, keep your eyes open. Use half of your remaining missiles to destroy the asteroids surrounding the cruiser. The debris should strain their shields enough for us to punch through them and take the ship out of the fight. Ignore the frigate. We will deal with it. The cruiser is the priority target. Captain Duvall out. A Deschutes cruiser, huh? Said Tobias, and thankfully for Roger, who was still coming to terms with the fact that he talked with Captain Duvall, it was over their private comm channel. You can't tell me that the hegemony isn't involved in this. I mean, we all knew they were working with the pirates, but that cruiser isn't one that any two-bit pirate can get their hands on. It's too modern by Batarian standards that they would let it fall into the hands of pirates without getting something out of it. You can say that again, agreed Roger mockingly, but that's exactly what they're going to tell the galaxy. Oh, sorry, it was stolen. We had nothing to do with this attack. A harsh laugh came over the comms as Tobias's answer. Wouldn't be the first time after all. I bet when we blow the cruiser up, we're going to see a crew composed of only Batarians. But of course, they're not part of the hegemony, but some pirates living out in the terminus systems. You're probably right, but that doesn't change what we're going to have to do now. I just hope our reinforcements are coming soon. We just have to stay alive long enough for that. And I, for one, am aiming to greet them with the wreckage of a Batarian cruiser. That's a plan I can get behind, laughed Tobias with a bit of surprise at Roger's bold statement. What he didn't know was that Roger didn't feel as brave or bold as his statement led him to believe. Rather, Roger tried to convince himself with this claim that everything was going to be okay. Nonetheless, he followed his fellow fighter pilots into the death trap that the asteroid field was going to be without any hesitation. After all, they had a job to do, and it was one Roger wanted to see the end of. Chapter 36. October 21st, 2173, 1809 local time, Iliam Tessel System, Nos Astra. In other news, an Alliance cruiser was attacked by pirate forces the day before yesterday in the Anatia system of the Hades Gamma Cluster. The Hyderabad was damaged immensely in the attack, and only the arriving reinforcements prevented the complete destruction of the ship. Dozens of Alliance members died during the attack. A speaker of the Alliance said that the investigation into the attack is still ongoing. He also mentioned that a higher number of patrols are going to be sent to the region to account for the increased pirate activities. Several colonies in the outer reaches expressed their concerns that they could be targets for pirate and slaver attacks beforehand. A gesture of my hand shut off the news feed, and I asked with skepticism, is the investigation truly still ongoing, or is the conclusion something that is politically volatile? The latter, answered Andrew's hologram. It's another try of the Batarian hegemony to attack us by proxies. The cruiser was reported stolen by pirates 5 weeks ago, at least according to their files. However, my people found out that those files got backdated, and there exist records that it was in a Batarian military dock for repairs less than a week ago. In short, nothing that would give us an advantage in any Citadel court, especially not before the Council. And if we got through with it anyway, the Batarians have more than enough reason to cry defamation, I concluded. It looks like that avenue isn't of use to us. Not that I ever expected it to be. The Citadel will only do something if confronted with irrefutable evidence, and what counts as such is open to interpretation. Unconsciously, I rolled my eyes. Irrefutable evidence could be anything from the word of a drug addict who was on the other side of the galaxy at the specified moment to bringing a judge to witness everything and broadcasting it on live TV. It all depended on the motives of those sitting in judgment and the agendas of the people behind them. At least tell me you're planning to address the issue. Who do you think I am? Scoffed Andrew. I always have plans. This one is no different. I already gave the green light for Operation Fervor. A whistle escaped me. Fervor, huh? Do you really think that's necessary? Yes, answered Andrew in a cold tone. The Batarians are cracking down on dissidents. Everyone showing even an ounce of displeasure with the current government gets redeployed to operations close to the terminus systems. Many of them suddenly become pirates that operate inside Alliance territory. And since the Alliance has a zero-tolerance policy towards pirates and slavers, they cease to be a problem for the Batarian hegemony, I finished. In theory, if one is able to ignore any and all moral and ethical problems, their way of doing things has its advantages. Sending those people who could become troublemakers for the current government on missions with a high probability of getting killed by the Alliance in such a way that one could shift all the blame onto the Alliance. The hegemony didn't just sacrifice the people that could become problems for them, but wrote the narrative in such a way that those still sitting on the fence were anticipated to work, if not for them, at least against the Alliance. Are there any issues regarding that? I asked. News are traveling slowly, commented Andrew. And for the most part, the official hegemony news arrives at the aggrieved parties first, spinning tales of how the big bad Alliance is at fault for getting their son, brother, husband, fill blank in here killed. They're not very quiet about that, so even the people on the other side of the city will know about it in a matter of hours. Of course, the how and why will not be mentioned or designated as classified. The latter gives it an air of mystique, as if they had done something of immeasurable value for the Batarian government. Nudge them in the right direction, give them room for interpretation, and people are going to believe whatever you want. Correct, agreed Andrew. It's not like we don't do it ourselves, so I don't believe we have any room to judge. Ooh, anything I should know? I asked with a playful grin. I would tell you if I could, responded Andrew, laughing, but you know how it is. Classified. A quiet chuckle escaped us both. Andrew's joke wasn't that funny, nor did it come unexpectedly. Yet somehow we could still find some humor in it. Changing the subject, said Andrew, and his usual seriousness had returned to his face. I believe I should congratulate you. After all, you're now the first human to obtain permission to research AI legally. Thank you, I responded with a small bow of my head. It wasn't easy, especially after the council itself got involved in the process. How did you get them to agree anyway? I haven't followed the proceedings as closely as I wanted, but I can't imagine they were happy with that. They definitely weren't. I sighed and smiled exhaustedly. I took a while to remove the roadblocks they put in my way, but it wasn't impossible. The council got involved too late to stop the process legally. I made sure to keep the process quiet until they got involved. After they noticed, I just notified the new friend I made here on Iliam to report the story. Miss Ch.34-36, I guess? Asked Andrew. Correct. She was happy enough to run the story, especially since she got exclusive rights to it from my side. And since there was no evidence of any wrongdoing from your side during the process, the council couldn't do anything to stop it. Am I right? Absolutely, I confirmed. Furthermore, the interest of the press put some more pressure on the council too. Anything they did could be seen as trying to undermine the laws they themselves put into place. And nobody likes a government that ignores their own laws. You're talking as if that wasn't happening anyway, laughed Andrew. If you got a position in the government, there are always decisions to make that could lead to that. You should know that, Mr. Ex-Minister. Of course, I know that. But if anyone asks, I will always say that I didn't have to make such a choice since there were always better alternatives. Are you telling me you don't? I put on my best scandalized face as if I was truly asking the question and didn't know that Andrew probably went against Alliance laws daily. I see what you mean, said Andrew, and I too would never break or go against any of the laws the Alliance Parliament put into place, not even when they're limiting my ability to protect the Alliance. I rolled my eyes. Now you're laying it on too thick, I said, to which I got a dismissive grunt over this connection. Anyway, only the most naive and oblivious people believe that their governments are squeaky clean and that nothing is happening behind the curtain. Yet everyone is happy to pretend that they are. A lie, or perhaps it would be better to call it an illusion, people prefer to believe in than to face reality. Furthermore, they get angry when it's shattered, continued Andrew. The actions that come to light often go against the prevalent current moral codex of society. And even if individuals don't see anything wrong with the actions the government has taken, society demands from them to take a certain stance if they don't want to be labeled as outsiders or different. Every society has to deal with something like this. How many Alliance citizens would call for your imprisonment if everything you did ever came to light? I would say they're not even going to call for my imprisonment, but for my execution, corrected Andrew with a smile that was a part grimace. And even if I showed them why I took those actions, how many lives my actions protected, society would still decry me as the bad guy. Silent praise, loud condemnation. Going against the law is wrong, so you're bad. It's an easy logic. Perhaps too easy, but it keeps most people from thinking that breaking the law is all right. The pressure of society's expectations keeps them in line better than the laws themselves. How did we get to the point that we're starting to discuss philosophy? Asked Andrew jokingly. I just congratulated you on your AI permit. I don't know, I chuckled. It just happened. Yet I still have to warn you, said Andrew with a serious expression. Since the news of your permit got out, there has been a wave of resentment against you. Let me guess. AI opponents? Correct, he confirmed and added, and they're not just popping up in our territory where I can monitor them. It doesn't surprise me that I'm making enemies with groups of the other species. There has been a large distrust toward AI since the beginning, led by the Asari, and that distrust has turned into outright fear after the Geth uprising. And some of those groups are known to not shy away from extreme measures if they feel that someone could be unleashing a new AI threat onto the galaxy. Are you telling me that I'm now the target of some extremists? I asked incredulously. You have been the target of extremists and nutcases since you became one of the most famous humans of our time, and now you're astounded about some AI opponents? Asked Andrew with a raised eyebrow. To be fair, he wasn't wrong. While my popularity among the Alliance citizens was high, there were also people, and not just those opposing me in the political or economic arena, who wanted to see me fall, or in the worst case, dead. One of the more interesting groups among them, back in the Alliance territory, thought I was a being from beyond the stars, sent to lead humanity into a golden age that would last for eternity. How that belief also translated into that eating my heart would grant them powers to rule over the galaxy, I will never understand. It's just that I didn't have time lately to keep up to date about such things. My dealings here on Iliam are picking up the pace, and I have to keep ahead of the other Circle members. Oh, anything interesting happen? The deal with Cesario is through. The weapons and gear got delivered to his warehouse. From there, he is slowly distributing them to different smaller warehouses without my assistance. Seems like he doesn't want to risk me muscling in on his territory. Yet if I know you, you got more out of this deal than he anticipated, right? Of course I did, I answered with a pleased grin. I got the names of his suppliers, contacts, distributors, and customers. The time isn't right to make a move yet, but the organization of the plan to slowly reduce Cesario's support base is complete. I'm just waiting for a bit. If I move so shortly after we work together, he will know instantly that it is me who is pulling the strings. You're going for those at the edge of his influence sphere first, correct? Guessed Andrew. Slowly moving inward, eroding his support while masking all your tracks until it becomes irrelevant if he discovers your involvement because he has become irrelevant? I couldn't help but sigh. It's no fun if you're guessing my moves. The suspense just went out the window. It's what I would have done, he shrugged. I'm ordering such moves almost daily, so forgive me if it isn't that interesting for me. Yeah, I waved his comment away. All in all, Andrew had guessed my strategy correctly, at least for the most part. I wanted to slowly work on the unimportant aspects of Sicurio's business and turn them to my side. Yet I wasn't willing to wait for too much longer after that. Instead, I was planning to move against the Turian directly and put him in a situation where he wouldn't be able to do anything. So instead of slowly turning him irrelevant while taking over, I wanted to acquire everything he had in one fell swoop. The thing Andrew hadn't thought of was that Cesario wasn't my only target. The whole circle of Alamina was my target. Cesario's contacts and weapon distribution, Nisko Ron's stocks, Nasara's properties, Detayovi's media and communication empire, and everything else those four owned. Not to forget, the secret funds the Circle shared and only opened for cooperative projects. In the end, everything would belong to me. Was I, perhaps, too greedy? What use did I have for such funds if I could generate the same amount with my assets in less time than I would need for my plans to come to fruition? I asked myself this question more than once, and I always came to the same conclusion. I didn't need them, yet I would do it nonetheless. I decided on a course of action. I decided I would do this, so I would do this. The monetary gain was a minor objective anyway, but not unimportant. After everything I found out about my fellow Circle members' assets, the money would be enough to pay for a second ruler class, especially now since developing the necessary technology was finished. And who knew how much there was in the Circle's fund? It wouldn't surprise me if there were even more in it. After all, the Circle existed for centuries by now. It wouldn't be far-fetched to believe that there were enough funds to match the amount my companies generated in a year. But in the end, that wasn't what truly interested me. It was the opportunity to take over their connections and assets outside the Alliance territory. It would take me, as a human, decades to gain the same amount of influence with the other species that those four cultivated over their lifetimes. Take Nasara's properties, for example. She owned land on all homeworlds except Tuchanka and Ranokh. It would take longer than the rest of my life to buy enough land on Thessia to build a small mansion, and that land would probably be on the other side of the planet from their capital. Just having her as an intermediary was enough for now. I was actually coming back from a meeting with her. Thanks to her help, I was now in the process of buying a sizable plot of land on Palaven, the homeworld of the Turians. The land was close to the second largest city on the planet and was known as the city with the most developed industrial center on the planet. I had no specific plans for it yet, but considering the prices were lower than usual at this time, it fell under the category of nice to have. Of course, that also meant dealing with Nasara and her nervous nature. The woman seemed like she was constantly under pressure, and that did make dealing with her a chore. I was glad everything was finished as far as personal dealings were concerned, and I only had to deal with her by electronic communication. "Sir, we're approaching the landing platform," came the voice of my driver over the intercom. I didn't recognize the voice of this particular driver, but it wasn't too surprising. They got replaced regularly to prevent them from spilling my travel plans to any of my enemies. After all, not everyone was as loyal as Janet, my old driver, and I couldn't expect her to follow me through the whole galaxy whenever I went to a different planet. I liked and owed her too much to demand that of her. Now she was only driving me around whenever I visited Terra Nova, something I hadn't done for some time. Perhaps I should find a free spot in my calendar for that. It would be a good idea to visit the university there too, talk to some professors and students, and show some concern for the ongoings there. It would be good PR and uplifting for the school spirit if the patron of the university showed up from time to time. "Thank you," I replied to my driver and turned to Andrew. "It seems like I have to end this call. It was nice speaking to you. Perhaps we can meet in person the next time I'm in Alliance territory. That way we can talk more openly." "You know I'm not going to tell you everything, right?" said Andrew. "You're not part of any government agency at the moment. But I'm still the biggest Alliance contractor, and nobody revoked my security clearance from my time as the Minister of Economics." "You mean nobody dared to even suggest it?" scoffed Andrew with a smile. "That too." "I'll look forward to it," Andrew replied to my previous question before his expression turned serious once more. "And don't forget what I said about those anti-AI fanatics. I may have some people out there, but not enough to keep everything under control. Don't worry, my own security forces should be more than enough to cover the gaps." "If you say so," said Andrew, not sounding overly convinced. I waved away his concerns, and after the usual farewell phrases, I ended the call. Just a moment after that, the shuttle landed, and I got up from my seat, walking toward the door. It opened with a hiss, and I suddenly got hit in the face with a strong gust of wind that forced me to squint. Through my squinted eyes, I could make out shapes running towards me, setting off the hairs on my neck. Something was wrong. I forced my eyes to open, relaxing momentarily, when I noticed the shapes were four of my security guards. Yet that went out the window too, when I saw what kind of expression was on their faces. I hurriedly walked out of the shuttle and toward them, my eyes flitting around to find out what had them so worried. There was nothing that stood out immediately, but perhaps something happened inside the building. "Sir!" screamed one of the guards over the howling find and the engine of the shuttle behind me. "Get back into the shuttle." "What?" I screamed back, having not understood his last words. The wind was just too loud to understand him clearly. "Into the shuttle now," he screamed again, louder this time and loud enough for me to understand him. It took me half a second to process his command, but as soon as my brain did, my body was in the process of turning around. If someone you hired to protect you gave you such an order, and with such concern and desperation in his voice like this one, you followed that command without questioning it. I wouldn't be that kind of idiot that got killed by ignoring the people I paid to ensure my safety. Yet, following that order made no difference as the shuttle door shut close, and the engines started howling as more energy got sent to them in preparation to take off. I jumped backward, landing on my left foot and turning on it to my security guards to run toward them. Apparently, my idea of exchanging drivers every so often wasn't the fail-safe I believed it would be. I knew I didn't recognize the voice of my driver, and I hadn't even seen his face. Was he new, or was he even one of my people? The shuttle slowly lifted off the ground, and I took another 2 steps closer to the guards, who were also coming closer to me. It would only take one more step, and the guard closest to me would be within arm's reach. Suddenly, I noticed something that sent a chill through my whole body. The eyes of the guard before me widened to an almost comical size before his mouth opened slightly in absolute horror. Something was happening behind me, and I had to squash the urge to turn around to see what it was. Whatever it wasn't good, and the farther away I was from it, the better. The security guard raised his right arm, holding his hand out for me with an expression of sheer determination, and I took it without hesitating even for a single moment. He pulled me toward him while slightly turning his body sideways, and the moment I was halfway past his body, he got behind me, shielding my back with it. The next thing I remembered was how I was flying through the air before hitting the ground hard and skidding over it. My whole body felt hot, and there was a loud ringing in my ears, drowning every other noise. I felt a weight on my back, pressing me to the ground. It was uncomfortable, but at the same time it was making me feel safe, so my thoughts were a mess. I couldn't keep a hold of any of them before it slipped my grasp and another took its place. The pounding headache wasn't making it any easier. I didn't know how much time had passed when the weight on my back finally disappeared. Hands grabbed me under my shoulders and lifted me to my feet, and I saw the face of a human wearing the outfit of one of my security guards. His mouth was moving, but I couldn't understand a single word he was saying, the ringing in my ears still too loud. Thankfully, the ringing was slowly receding, and I could make out other sounds around me. The first sound I could make out was something familiar to me. It was the staccato of firing guns. Was there someone shooting around me? Were we under attack? As that thought flew through my mind, it was like a veil lifted from my perception. Adrenaline was shooting through my veins. The ringing in my ears disappeared completely, and I could finally hold a thought longer than for a few seconds. "What's going on?" I asked. The words came out as a wheeze, and even that took effort on my side. "We're under attack, sir," said a voice behind me, and I thought that statement was quite obvious. "Who?" "Unknown, sir," replied the security guard, helping me stand. "And unimportant for now. We have to get you inside, sir. It isn't safe out here. The mobile shield won't hold for much longer." I turned my head sideways, ignoring the sharp stab of pain in my neck, and out of the corner of my eyes I could see the blue shimmering wall of a mobile kinetic shield generator. Furthermore, I noticed how small ripples appeared all over the shield and understood we were under fire. The security guard pulled me forward, and I did my best to put one foot before the other to get to the entrance of the building. More and more security guards poured out of the building in our direction, armed to the teeth. Some of them had riot shields strapped to their arms and positioned themselves behind us, walking slowly backward to protect our backs. The closer we got to the entrance, the foggier my mind became. Perhaps it was the feeling that everything was going to be all right that resulted in that, or it was because the adrenaline boost was slowly losing its potency, but my head started to pound like wild, and the pain in my neck and back became more pronounced. We were only a few steps before the entrance when somebody cried, "RPG!" and I got shoved to the ground. Thankfully, the rocket exploded some distance away, and we got only pelted by small debris. Seconds after that, we passed into the building, and I was more pulled than walked through the lobby until we reached a medical team that took over my care from the security guard that had escorted me to them. I wanted to ask his name, He definitely deserved a raise after today. But the darkness that had sat around the edges of my vision for the last minutes wouldn't wait anymore. The last thing I remembered before everything turned back was the shouting and cheers from the people outside.